Well, the first thing to say is that although it is directed by Danny Boyle, I do think of it as unfilmed Richard Curtis, and not just because Danny Boyle just said this was the Simon Mayo show, because as he said in that, it came from an idea by Jack Barth, and then Richard Curtis and Jack Barth both credited with story, and Richard Curtis is the screenwriter. And this isn't just incidentally because of the email that we have from Simon Beaufoy. When I was watching it, I was thinking this is the best directed Richard Curtis film I have ever seen, because the DNA of that story, of the of the whole setup, is so absolutely Richard Curtis. So as you said in that interview, the story is Himesh Patel, who is in this really, I think, star-making turn, genuinely star-making turn as Jack Malik, who at a moment of a worldwide power outage, which lasts about 12 seconds, gets hit by a bus, wakes up, and realises that nobody in the world remembers the Beatles other than him. And there's some sort of funny knockabout slapstick stuff when he goes and looks up the Beatles on the internet, and all he can get is stuff about Beatles and Stag Beatles. And then he starts looking up other bands like Rolling Stones. Oh no, they still exist. And then there's a gag which I'm not going to spoil, because one of the temptations when you're reviewing a Richard Curtis film is just immediately to start reciting the gags that made you laugh. Many of them are in the trailer, incidentally, but I'm not going to start doing that. So after a brief wrestling with this country, he suddenly realises that his career of being a singer-songwriter can be infinitely aided by the fact that he can now pass off these songs as his own. And of course, what then starts to happen is two things. Firstly, on the one hand, people recognise that these songs that he's writing are absolutely brilliant. When he first plays Yesterday, and Lily James's character, who is essentially, up until that point, she's his manager, she's his roadie, she's his best friend, and it's clear from the beginning of the film that there is more to that relationship than that, but she's the person who has stood by him. And she says, "When did you write that?" And he said, "I didn't write that. Paul McCartney wrote it." From the Beatles. Who are the Beatles? And so suddenly he's in this world in which he's the only person who knows those songs. And there is much, fun knockabout slapstick humour then to be had from him playing Let It Be to his parents for the first time, and they just keep not listening, played by Sanjeev Bhaskar and Meera Syal. Incidentally, Sanjeev Bhaskar said that the line in that film, that the thing about leave him be, Sanjeev said that as far as his memory is concerned, he ad-libbed that, and then Meera ended up saying it.
Oh, really?
So he said this,
that's marriage for you.
That's right. There's now a lot of sort of cause of, who actually did that, where they come from.
I think that's my favourite scene. I mean, that's why I mentioned it in the interview. It's such a great look, Mum and Dad, and they're all distracted, and there's other things going on, I think.
Yeah, and when the guy answers the phone, oh yes, I'm sitting here listening to Jack's new song, and then Sanjeev,
start again, lad.
Start again, but just maybe start a little bit on. I've heard that bit 3 times. So the setup is, you said it's like a what if movie, and I'm a sucker for those kind of, those what if things. Partly because on the one hand, it doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't matter because it's a conceit. So what if you were the only person? And I also confess that I have many times done that. What if I went back in time and I knew the whole Elvis Costello songbook before Elvis Costello wrote it? And I would then write all those songs immediately, but then you'd have to go and apologise to Declan McManus for the fact that he didn't have a career because you'd written all those songs beforehand. And actually, one of my favourite scenes in the film is when Jack realises that he doesn't remember all of them. He knows that there's this whole body of songs that he can't quite remember, and he's trying to remember how Eleanor Rigby goes. And there's there's a lot of directorial fun with that as well. So I went in knowing the premise, thinking I like the premise, and I'm a total sucker for Richard Curtis, always have been. And I like Danny Boyle's filmmaking very, very much. And I thought, firstly, that it has in it, really, really likable, properly likable leads. So I thought Himesh Patel absolutely nailed it as Jack Malik. I just believed in his character completely. And I think Lily James as Ellie, I think she's just a really great screen presence. She's she's got that sort of star quality thing. She lights up the screen, and so immediately you're in the company of these people that you like, and a great supporting cast, including Sanjeev and Meera Syal, and all these kind of supporting characters, and incidentally something which is much more than a cameo, but a supporting role by a very, very famous pop. Are we allowed to say who that? I mean, people have written about it, haven't they? Who the person who plays themselves? Can we say? Well, let's not, because in case everyone sees it's in the trailer, but let's pretend we haven't, okay?
What, Ed Sheeran?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it was in the interview. We talked about
Yeah, no, I know, but for fun. Okay, so Ed Sheeran plays himself in the thing, and I've read a couple of things and people saying, oh, he's not very good playing himself. Rubbish. I think he's really good playing himself. I think that's one of the best somebody playing themselves roles I've seen. And bear in mind, you and I have done a tiny thing, which we played as
we were great as ourselves.
We were great as ourselves, but I think he's really genuinely funny. So, I started watching the film, and immediately, because I like the songs very much, obviously. I mean, I'm not a huge Beatles bore by any means at all, but obviously you know all those songs. And I'm a real sucker for Richard Curtis's kind of, and in many ways, for example, there's a sidekick figure who literally could have been transported from Notting Hill straight into the movie. And there's the same kind of slightly bumbling quality to the hero. Many of Richard Curtis's heroes have that same voice that you can hear. But I started laughing almost off the bat and thinking, I really like the way the setup's done. I love the way that as a director, Danny Boyle has that thing about doing that global event, shum, 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 doing it very sort of, you understand, fine, you accept it, you move on. And then about 20, 30 minutes in, I started to feel the kind of the melancholia thing, which he's talking about, because obviously the whole thing with the Beatles catalogue is absolutely the melancholia. And also, they're now living in a world in which the Beatles don't exist. And there is the question about, is the world more melancholy for the fact that the Beatles don't exist? So I laughed a lot. By the end of it, the last 20 minutes or 25 minutes of it, I cried because I felt I was in that warm place. I was in that warm, safe place of I really love the conceit. I don't care about the things that don't make sense. There is one scene that we won't discuss what it is, but there is one scene that quite simply could have been lifted out in its entirety, and I think the movie wouldn't have lost anything for removing it.
Okay, so when people go and see it, they'll know exactly
what
we're talking about. Yeah. So was it that you didn't like that scene, or just that it was irrelevant?
I felt that it was the one note that felt like the train going over the points. It was the one bit that I thought, I don't know why this has to be here. And in fact, I think actually I would rather it wasn't here. But I think it says an awful lot about the good-natured barreling charm of the film that I didn't care. And it is, again, it comes down to that thing that if you are going with a film and if you like a film, it can do a kind of a curve move that you think that's completely all over the place and that what you're doing, but you don't mind and you let it go. And it's come back to the thing about, you'll forgive your friends for eating with their hands, but you criticize your enemies for crossing their knife and fork. And this film could have eaten its entire meal with its hands tied behind its back and its face in the pudding, and I would have forgiven it because I just loved it.
It's not an expression I've ever used, I have to say.